On this week's episode of the Campus Countdown, a Pew Research Center poll reveals that only 3% of Hispanics use the term Latinx, yet higher education still encourages faculty and staff to use it. One professor believes that the term Latinx can be used to, quote, promote gender inclusivity, end quote, disregarding the fact that only a small percentage of the Hispanic community has ever even heard of the term. Campus Reform Correspondent Ben Zeisloft joins us this week to discuss another example of conservative chalking getting destroyed on campus, while of course, liberal chalking stays intact. Also on this week's episode, one student newspaper's editorial board claims that gifted programs and IQ tests are racist. I'm Addison Pummill, and this is the Campus Countdown. For our third top story of the week, the editorial board at the University of Pittsburgh student newspaper recently published an article calling to get rid of the gifted programs in surrounding schools. The board says, quote, the program is deeply flawed, encouraging students to unnecessarily compete against each other academically, and often ends up leaving behind students of color, end quote. The board also claimed that IQ tests are often used to promote racism and white supremacy. There is a national movement by the left to eliminate anything that differentiates students based on merit, and abolishing the gifted program at the schools around the University of Pittsburgh is only the most recent development. In the peak of COVID, many universities actually eliminated their standardized testing requirement for applications, meaning that students would not have to submit ACT or SAT scores as they did in the past. This trend can also be seen in universities straying away from merit-based scholarships and towards race and more need-based scholarships. When we eliminate the programs that allow students to prove their intelligence and prove their grit, we are stripping students of an incentive to work harder. I mean, why would students strive for straight A's and exceptional ACT scores when they will just be overlooked in the decision process simply due to their lack of financial need or their race? I was a part of the gifted program all throughout my primary education, and I would argue that the competition created by the program was a benefit and not a flaw. All students take the exact same placement tests to enter the gifted program, and the tests were offered every single year so that students who were not initially able to enter could join the program later on if they met the qualifications. The gifted program in my district required students to miss 3 hours of regular class each week, and it required extra tests, extra homework, and projects on top of all of our regularly scheduled coursework. The gifted program forced me to learn skills such as time management, self-reliance, and follow-through, because when I missed class each week, I had to go out of my way to make up the missed information and the missed assignments. Contrary to what the editorial board at the University of Pittsburgh student newspaper says, all students have an equal opportunity to enter, so these programs are not about race. They're about giving students who want to work hard an outlet to do so. For our second story of the week, we have Campus Reform Senior Correspondent Ben Zeisloft here to tell you more.
Thanks, Addison. College students often use chalk displays to spread their beliefs on campus, but across the country, we're seeing conservative chalk displays get destroyed while liberal chalk displays go untouched. At Central Michigan University, the school's college Republicans wrote several chalk slogans, including Back the Blue, Pro-Life is Pro-Women, and Love Them Both, along with a note pleading for students to practice the tolerance they preach by leaving the messages untouched. Instead, one student crossed out the messages with chalk and modified them to fit leftist talking points, like by scratching out the word life in Pro-Life is Pro-Women and replacing it with choice. He even boasted about erasing, quote, propaganda, racist, and pro-life BS, unquote, on Twitter. The same thing happened to 9/11 displays at schools like Mount Holyoke College and Washington University in St. Louis. But at Point Park University, a group of liberal students were able to celebrate National Coming Out Day without any harm to their chalkings. The LGBTQ rainbow flag remained on campus sidewalks undisturbed throughout the entire day. The contrast here teaches us two things. Number one, that there is an ideological orthodoxy on college campuses, and number two, that any deviation from that orthodoxy cannot be tolerated whatsoever. A 2020 study looking at over 12,000 academics found that American college professors donate to Democrats over Republicans at a 95-to-1 ratio. Party identification tells the same story. Nearly half of those professors, 48.5%, were registered Democrats, while just 5.7% were registered Republicans. As any non-leftist college student in America will testify, this has real implications for what they say in class and the overall climate of their campuses. Any deviation from leftist orthodoxy may get them canceled. And how does this cancellation often happen? They're an army of useful idiots who have been taught that unorthodoxy is violence. Another recent poll found that 1/3 of college students think it is always acceptable or sometimes acceptable to shout down a campus speaker in order to, quote, prevent them from speaking on campus, unquote. That ratio is especially high at certain schools. At Wesleyan University and UC Berkeley, it's 82% and 80%. This is the environment that conservative and free-thinking students must navigate. To have their views heard, they need to push back against a flood of angry classmates and professors. Some bow to the pressure and they operate with a get in, get out mentality. Just leave me alone, let me get my degree, I'll be out of here. And that's totally understandable. But for others, they learn to walk toward the fire, getting their ideas sharpened by constant opposition.
Thanks for coming on this week, Ben. It really is such a shame that there is this huge double standard in today's higher education. Now moving on to our top story of the week. A poll from the Pew Research Center found that only 23% of Hispanics have ever heard of the term Latinx, and only 3% actually use the term. The poll also showed that 38% of Hispanic college graduates have heard of the term Latinx, as opposed to 14% of Hispanics without a college degree. The left has instigated an attack on the English language, and now it seems they have moved on to the Spanish language. An ethnic studies professor at the University of California, Berkeley, believes the term Latinx can be used to, quote, promote gender inclusivity, end quote, despite the fact that hardly any Hispanics actually choose to label themselves in this way. In June, Brandeis University added words such as picnic, rule of thumb, and even policeman to their list of canceled words, telling students that these words are used to, quote, perpetuate oppression, end quote. Restrictive vocabulary is used to restrict freedom and restrict thought. And if you've ever read the great classic 1984 by George Orwell, you know that destroying language is the first step to destroying a country, and the left has attached itself to this idea. In fact, Northwestern University even changed Hispanic Heritage Month to Latinx Heritage Month, and Harvard uses the term in an academic department and in a student group. Higher education has latched onto the word Latinx and other words like it. The fact that only 3% of surveyed Hispanics use the word proves that progressive white saviors are trying to push their agenda on everyone else. It's not the Hispanics who want this word changed, but rather a bunch of white professors and white university administration trying to tell Hispanics that they cannot use a word from their native language. Our woke tweet of the week comes from Associate Professor Brittany Cooper. On November 2nd, the day of the election, she tweeted, quote, sitting here disheartened about the irrational, cynical, disingenuous Republican hysteria over critical race theory, which they rebranded as parental rights, will probably lose us the Virginia election tonight, while re-enabling the smooth functioning of white supremacy, end quote. Professor Youngkin didn't win because voters want to promote white supremacy. He won because, among so many other reasons, McAuliffe said he didn't want parents to have a say in their children's education. Professor Cooper and other leftists want to attack the red victory in Virginia, labeling it white supremacy or some other liberal buzzword. They ignore the fact that Virginians let their voice be heard in the polls this week, and as can be seen clearly in the election results, they are already fed up with the blue, one-party rule of the United States. Those are all the stories we have for you this week. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to follow along with all of the liberal abuse in higher education on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by following us at Campus Reform. We will be back next week with another episode of the Campus Countdown. I'm Addison Pummill. Thanks for watching.